Okay, there we're just letting our guests in. A bit of a lag. Here they all come. Okay, so for everyone who's online at the moment, I just wish to welcome you here to the COMET Resources investor briefing. Matt O'Kane will take over very shortly. Look, if there's any questions that you have for Matt during this webinar, please submit them using the Q&A button on your screen, and we'll get to them at the conclusion of this webinar. It is being recorded, so we will be able to get this out to the masses once it concludes. So without further ado, Matt, do you want to take over?
Yep, thanks, Evie. Okay, thanks for attending today, for those who've registered and for those who sent questions as well. The purpose of today's webinar is to update you on our progress and the process towards reinstatement or relisting of the company's shares on the ASX, and the things that have been notified to shareholders in the recent press release that went out this week, and also and to give you an idea of where to from here. So, of course, just backing up a little bit, we withdrew from the Mount Margaret transaction in May of this year. Obviously, that was a disappointing outcome for both, everybody on the board and all of the shareholders. It has been, unfortunately, quite a difficult market in the last 12 to 18 months. It's been very hard to raise funds in what essentially was an IPO, and an IPO that required quite a large amount of money. So we had to make the decision eventually to cease pursuing that transaction and move forward to a reinstatement of the company, which is what we've been doing. So the initial process of reinstatement was to submit an application to the ASX for requotation of securities. Now, this is required because of the material nature of the transaction that we're undertaking with Mount Margaret. The ASX suspended the company's shares from trading, and the reason they did this was they don't just do this to COMET, they do this in any situation like this, where there's a very, very material transaction happening, and it's uncertain whether that transaction will complete. They don't want the shares to be trading on what is potentially incomplete information, and have essentially people trading assuming the transaction may complete when it doesn't. So they suspend the shares, and the shares are only requoted after the transaction completes, or if the transaction is withdrawn, then you go through the process that we're going through right now. So we submitted that application for requotation of our shares, and we got the conditions for requotation from the ASX a couple of months ago. Those conditions were, we believed, quite favourable. They required us to, the key things were to raise sufficient funds to meet the financial requirements for reinstatement. So essentially you have to have enough money to make sure you can fund your operations and fund your exploration programs. And secondly, we had to commence drilling at the Barraba Copper Project in New South Wales. There were a number of other what I'll call generally sort of disclosure and admin requirements, which are relatively easy to meet. So the two sort of key things were to raise funds, and we had to raise a minimum $1 million in the convertible notes, plus we had to do 2.3 million basically in a 1-for-3 rights issue. So we started working on the notes, the convertible loans, and to date we've raised 830,000 out of the required 1 million. And then we also went to work on drilling and commencing drilling at Barraba. Now, in 2022, we were issued, after we got through the native title dispute, which was resolved in our favour in 2022, we then applied for and received a permit for drilling at Barraba in New South Wales. Now, New South Wales is quite a bit different than what I call other key mining states in Australia, where once a drilling permit is issued, you have a significant amount of time to undertake the drilling operations. In WA, I believe it's about 3 years. Northern Territory, it's 3 years. Queensland, I believe, is similar. And it sort of makes sense that you get a reasonable amount of time to complete the drilling, because drilling can be affected by access to the sites, either through landowner requirements. It may be on a farm, it may be on a cattle property where you have to work around owners' seasons for their agricultural works. You may have weather events that prevent you from accessing it in a timely fashion, et cetera, et cetera. So it's generally, you have quite a bit of time. In New South Wales, they give you a very short window, and that initial permit expired towards the end of 2022. We couldn't commence the work by that stage because we were still working on doing the Mount Margaret transaction, which would have provided the funds to complete that exploration program at Barraba. But however, we were very confident that we would be able to get a permit issued again this year, because a permit was issued last year. We submitted an unchanged work program, and we went through around about a 6-week process of addressing issues with the New South Wales government on certain questions around the revised application. And once they were satisfied, they then notified us that the land had been rezoned to an area that now includes potentially a species of critically endangered bird. They then notified us that as a result of that, we have to complete certain flora and fauna surveys to determine the impact of our proposed activities on the critically endangered bird species in particular. There is also an endangered species of gum, but the key factor here is the critically endangered species, which is critically endangered is the highest rating of endangered species. So that was quite disappointing to find that out for a number of reasons. One, I was disappointed that they didn't inform us about this change at the start of the permitting process, which would have allowed us to do work up front. And secondly, it was obviously just disappointing to find out that it had been rezoned. And the government has its own reasons for that, and they don't really have to answer to us, unfortunately. So what we've done since then is we've been working on multiple pathways to reinstatement, and we've been working with the ASX as well. So we're in the process of engaging a firm to conduct the required work for the flora and fauna surveys in New South Wales. But we believe that process is going to take a significant amount of time between us completing that work, the government then reviewing that work, and then the government either issuing a permit subject to certain conditions or potentially requiring further work to be done. So the best outcome there is that we do the work and we get a permit. That still is not going to happen in the time period required for the reinstatement conditions. I should mention that when we got the reinstatement conditions from the ASX, we had until November 25th to meet those conditions. And as I said, we were quite confident that we could, because we permitted Barraba last year. We were confident that we could permit it again, therefore, this year with an unchanged program. And obviously that hasn't been the case. So now that we are in this situation with that requirement for additional work in New South Wales to be done on the flora and fauna, we won't be able to meet that November 25th timing. We are therefore in the process of not only advancing that work stream for the flora and fauna at Barraba, but we're also looking at the potential for us to go and drill some of our Northern Territory projects, and we're working on permitting of those right now also. However, because that wasn't our primary plan, and we didn't plan to actually drill in the Northern Territory this year, we planned to drill in the Northern Territory next year. Starting that permitting process again now means that, again, we wouldn't be able to commence drilling and meet the requirements, even if the ASX would vary the requirement from commencing drilling at Barraba to commencing drilling at the Northern Territory. There's still not enough time to do that before November 25th. So we've been in discussions with the ASX on varying the timing and also varying the condition of drilling at Barraba, because we believe it's unlikely that we're going to be able to drill Barraba this year. It may be as far out as Q2 next year before we could get on there and drill. So that's an ongoing process with the ASX. There is no result yet, and they are two possible pathways to meeting conditions for reinstatement should they be varied. Is either get lucky with the permit in New South Wales, which we think is unlikely though, get a permit in the Northern Territory and have the ASX agree to vary the reinstatement conditions from drilling at Barraba to drilling at the Northern Territory. In addition to that, though, there are other possible avenues back to reinstatement, because the ASX does have a requirement, and this is key here, the ASX does have a requirement that we commence drilling or undertake drilling work at a project that the company has. So there is also the potential for us to engage in activities to obtain a new project that is drill ready and subject to the ASX's agreement, then commencing drilling on that. So there's really sort of three parallel pathways that we're undertaking at the moment to get the company reinstated. One is to continue to advance the work for permitting in New South Wales. Again, noting we think that's going to take quite a bit of time. Advance permitting and get a permit in the Northern Territory. We believe we can get a permit there in a relatively short time period, but we're still to determine when we can access the land. As I said, the land is, all of this land actually in the Northern Territory is also agricultural land or farming land for cattle. And so you have to work with the landowners on access. Or the third pathway is to find a new project, bring that in and have the ASX agree to vary the conditions such that we complete work on that new project rather than the existing projects if we can't either permit them and therefore permit them and get onto those licenses in the timeframe required to commence work. So that's really the summary of things at the moment. Unfortunately, we don't have a definitive answer on when the company will be reinstated. We are just working on those three pathways to get reinstated as soon as possible. And as I said, we're liaising with the ASX on all of those matters. And I'm hoping in the next sort of, month to 2 months at the most, we have an answer and a clear pathway on one of those three. That is all we can do at the moment, and we'll continue to press on that. So I'll just open it up for any questions at the moment. Evie, has there been any questions come through?
Hi, Matt. No, there's none from who's online at the moment, but I know that we did receive some on registration. So do you just want to go through those ones?
Yeah, okay. So I had a question on what is the deadline to get relisted. So the deadline at present is January 30th of next year. Now, that deadline can be extended by the ASX, but it is at their discretion, and they would likely only extend that deadline if we had a clear pathway to meeting the requirements for reinstatement shortly afterwards. And essentially what that means is they would want us to have a project that is permitted for drilling and that we are going to be able to go out and drill shortly afterwards. If we reach January 30th and we have no pathway to meeting the conditions for reinstatement, it's possible the ASX delists the company at that stage. What we do after that is essentially up to shareholders and the board and management to decide, but highly likely what we do is we just find a project and apply essentially to IPO and relist that way. So there may just be a timing delay there. That was the only key question that I had come through. Really, everybody seems to, and understand.
Sorry, Matt. There is one more that's just popped in now. What's going to happen to the IG6 shares? IG6 shares when they come out of escrow, I imagine it would be different depending on whether CRL is listed or not.
Yes, that's a good question. So the IG6 shares come out of escrow on April 7th next year. What will happen to the shares is up to the company, essentially. So, you know, what we can do is if we were listed again at that stage, we can elect to hold on to those shares and see if they appreciate. And we would make that decision at that point in time based on what we think the future prospects of IG6 are. I'll give you a little summary on that in a moment. Or we could elect to sell them and use those funds either to purchase new assets, support the company's expenses on existing projects, or make distributions to shareholders. So they're the sort of the range of potential opportunities for the IG6 shares. Just to give you all a little bit of a summary of IG6 and what's going on there at the moment. So recently they had a big milestone with releasing a new resource. The resource is, quite frankly, very, very good. It's the second biggest graphite resource in Australia. They are now moving through a process essentially to move towards a PFS and a DFS on the resource, so on the Springdale project itself. They're advancing different studies on the downstream processing. Also, they produced a study on the downstream processing which showed extremely robust financial returns for the downstream processing. The key for IG6 now is to get that the Springdale resource, so the Springdale project itself, through studies to de-risk it, so through PFS and DFS, because at that point in time, it de-risks the whole downstream processing as well, because it validates that you can use Springdale as the feed for the downstream processing. And that is the point where it's highly likely that you get the battery manufacturers and the automotive companies coming in to invest in the business. So there's lots of positive discussions going on around that, around the conferences that IG6 attends. The feedback's been very good on the resource. The company just needs to keep on executing, which they've been doing since they've, in fact, been doing things faster and better results than what they foreshadowed at the IPO. We are unfortunately in a very difficult market for the small cap and mid cap mining companies at the moment. Nearly every small cap and mid cap stock is down this year, the exception being some lithium companies. But at the end of the day, all you can do is you execute. If you keep on executing, it is a critical mineral. Last Friday, China announced they're going to restrict export of graphite from China, which has had a positive impact on share prices of graphite companies this week. So I'm personally a believer in the long-term potential for IG6. And so, as I said, once those shares come out of escrow on April 7th, regardless of whether we're listed or delisted, we make a decision then on what do we do with those shares. And there are those range of alternatives: hold onto them, sell them, something in between, and also potentially do distributions to shareholders. So they're the options.
I know that you've addressed this question in the past before, but it's just about the, should we have retained the Springdale project and could we have mined that ourselves? Was it a good decision to the way that you handled that transaction with IG6? Was it a mistake, basically, or was that the best decision for shareholders?
I still believe it was the best decision for shareholders. The International Graphite team have proven their technical competence, which was the reason that we decided to partner with them. Graphite is an extremely niche product. Even though it's now growing in demand for battery anodes, it's still only around about a 2 million tonne per annum at the moment global market. It will grow to sort of 3 and 4, but you still are talking a very small market in terms of total tonnes. If you look at iron ore, for example, there's about 1 billion tonnes of production globally per annum. So it is a very niche market, and finding people who have the technical competence to develop a project properly is extremely difficult. So they have been executing very well. They have demonstrated their technical competence. I think if we had kept the project, we wouldn't have seen great returns because the whole market's down and we would have been down with it, like graphite in general. And the key is with graphite projects is the money doesn't accrue to the owner of the resource. Quite frankly, there's a fair bit of graphite around the world. It just really hasn't been looked for in the past. The key thing is having graphite that's in the right place, which it is in WA, of course, but then having the downstream processing, because that's where the real value add comes. You could sell, fine graphite for maybe $600 to $800 a tonne and make a small margin. But if you process it downstream, that's where you get the massive uplift into the $4,000, $6,000 per tonne kind of price ranges. And that's where the real value is. So I believe it's the correct decision. And I believe over time, the share price in International Graphite will reflect that.
Sounds great. I think that's a wrap. That was a great little brief update. I'm sure that there will be more to come the closer we get to reinstatement to the ASX, and we look forward to those.
Yeah, and I'd just say for shareholders who have additional questions or who think of other questions later, you can email the COMET email, which is on all of our press releases, and I will get back to you.
Matt.
All right. Thank you, everyone.